damage and diminish those separations of power that we all believe are very important to a thriving democracy. Uh, the president also spoke of many of his hopes, his vision for the future, and why the U.S. Israeli relationship is so important. And so let's go to that speech. The president of Israel talked about the origins of the state of Israel, what the country has become over the years. He voiced strong support for that independent judiciary that is the elusive thing and the controversial thing happening on the ground in Israel today.
We built a nation state, a country which takes pride in its vibrant democracy, its protection of minorities, human rights and civil liberties as laid down by its parliament, the Knesset, and safeguarded by its strong Supreme Court and independent judiciary.
So very important messages coming from the president of Israel, reinforcing their commitment to democracy, to that separation of powers that is so vital. And I thought this was important. The president took time during his speech to address the protests that are currently going on. There's one march that has begun at one end and is going to the other, 50-kilometer march over 4 days. Hundreds of thousands of people joining in that to protest some of these proposed changes of the Netanyahu government relating to the judiciary. So President Herzog addressed those that are rallying, those that are protesting, and lauded them as a strong expression of Israeli democracy.
Our democracy is also reflected in protesters taking to the streets all across the country to emphatically raise their voices and fervently demonstrate their points of view. And as President of Israel, I am here to tell the American people and each of you that I have great confidence in Israeli democracy. Although we are working through sour issues, just like you, I know our democracy is strong and resilient. Israel has democracy in its DNA.
I thought President Herzog did a great job in this speech. He covered a lot of ground. He hit the right notes, I think, in terms of the bonds and connections between the U.S. and Israel. Talked about those threads of DNA of democracy in both Israel and the United States. In fact, at one point, President Herzog mentioned the inscription on the Liberty Bell as an expression of both Israel's and America's shared values that should help define the future of the relationship.
The inscription on Philadelphia's Liberty Bell articulates the Hebrew Bible's code of ethics. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto the inhabitants thereof. This verse from Leviticus, shining through the crack of the Liberty Bell, underscores the principles that fuel the American dream. These words have bound our nation through the ages.
To a great applause in that portion of the speak from President Herzog today. Now, the president has been meeting with President Biden following that speech to the joint session of Congress earlier today. We haven't seen them emerge yet. Initially, they were scheduled to speak together, to be in front of the press. Nothing has happened on that front. Not sure if that's been scrapped or just running behind schedule. We'll continue to monitor that, of course. One of the other areas that I thought was a really important, noteworthy portion of the speech from Israel's President Herzog today to the joint session of Congress was dealing with foreign policy. He had very strong words to say about the threat that Iran poses to both Israel and to the United States.
Perhaps the greatest challenge Israel and the United States face at this time together is the Iranian nuclear program. The Iranian regime, together with its proxies throughout the Middle East, is aiming and working towards destroying the state of Israel, killing the Jews, and challenging the entire free world. Allowing Iran to become a nuclear threshold state is unacceptable.
He also had some very interesting and ultimately hopeful points to make. He spent some time talking about Israel and Palestine, the ongoing conflict between the two of them, and why that conversation has to change, and that violence cannot be part of the equation.
My deep yearning, Mr. Speaker, is for Israel to one day make peace with our Palestinian neighbors. However, true peace cannot be anchored in violence. The younger generation of Israelis and Palestinians deserve better. They are all worthy of a future to look towards, a future of peace and prosperity, a future of hope. And I'm wholeheartedly committed to this vision, a vision of hope and peace, true peace, without any terror.
I think it's an important message there. And I thought it was interesting during this portion of the speech, President Herzog from Israel talked about the fact that true peace cannot be anchored in violence. And he spent time talking about some of the terrorism that has gone on, but he seemed to be calling out both sides, that no one has an excuse for violence, and that's where it has to begin. He also pinned great hope on the rising generation, recognizing that not only do they deserve better, but often they understand better than maybe some of the older generations who have been deeply divided, bitterly divided, hunkered down and divided, unwilling to see the dignity of the other side. And I think that's where it actually all begins, is when you can see across those differences, where you don't see every difference as a reason for division, but you can recognize that difference is part of the dignity of another human being. And that's where that really has to begin. Then finally, President Herzog, as he wrapped up his speech to the joint session of Congress earlier today in Washington, D.C., reaffirmed the bond between the United States and Israel, describing our relationship in very interesting family terms.
It is now a little after 6 p.m. in Israel. They will sit down to dinner together beside family or friends with whom they may severely disagree, but they are and they will always remain family. Israel and the United States will inevitably disagree on many matters, but we will always remain family. Our revolutionary societies have so much to give to the world and so much to learn from each other. Our bond may be challenged at times, but it is absolutely unbreakable.
Our bond may be challenged, but it is absolutely unbreakable. A rousing finish there from President Herzog from Israel today in front of a joint session of Congress. He did talk about those who spoke out in dissent. He definitely gave a nod to some of the members of Congress that on the Democratic side who had criticized and said some pretty defamatory things about Israel as a discriminatory state. He acknowledged them. He said, "I am always open to feedback from a friend," and he considered the United States a friend. And he said even some within this chamber, the House of Representatives, have given him some feedback. And he doesn't have to agree with the feedback, but as part of that unbreakable chain, as part of that DNA that connects us in democracy and freedom, he will allow that to happen and he will receive that. I thought that was an interesting message and not a bad thing for us to think about here in the United States as well. So again, it was definitely a tale of two headlines today. The freedom and power of democracy in Israel in an important area of the world, with the backdrop of what is happening in Israel today, protests over proposed changes by the Netanyahu government that would change and undermine the authority and the separation of powers as it relates to their Supreme Court. Lots to think about, lots to rethink about when it comes to Israel and when it comes to our own commitment to the principles of freedom and democracy.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson. The July heat wave.
Triple digits are returning this weekend.
Means we're all on fire watch.
54% of fire starts this year have been human caused.
Stay updated on the risk of wildfire. Listen to Tim and Amanda mornings from 5 to 9 and Jeff Kaplan on the drive home from 3 to 7. Utah Fire Watch on KSL News Radio.
I have diabetes. I'm at risk for pneumococcal pneumonia.
I have asthma. I'm at risk too.
If you're 19 or older with chronic conditions like asthma, diabetes, COPD, or heart disease, or are 65 or older, you are at increased risk for pneumococcal pneumonia. Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Prevnar 20, pneumococcal 20-valent conjugate vaccine, a vaccine that can help protect you against pneumococcal pneumonia in just one dose. Even if you've already been vaccinated with other pneumonia vaccines, Prevnar 20 may help provide added protection. Prevnar 20 is approved for adults to help prevent infections from 20 strains of the bacteria that cause pneumococcal pneumonia. Continued approval may depend on a supportive study. Don't get Prevnar 20 if you've had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine or its ingredients. Adults with weakened immune systems may have a lower response to the vaccine. Side effects include pain and swelling at the injection site, fatigue, headache, muscle, and joint pain. For full prescribing information, please call 1-855-213-2138 or visit Prevnar20.com.
Smart, connected, modern. Discover life-enhancing independent living services at Trio South Ogden. They do things a little differently there because you're different. With everything you need to support your best self, you'll find that joy isn't just for the young, it's for the young of heart. Trio South Ogden's signature programs provide a unique approach to wellness that brings living well and well-being to life. To learn more, contact Trio South Ogden at 801-475-4004 or visit triosouthodden.com.
Would you be upset if you lost $111,000 in retirement income? Get this, 96% of Americans, 96% lose an average of $111,000 in Social Security income. Learn how you could avoid this in a free report, the Social Security Decisions Guide from Boss Retirement Solutions, a 5-time winner of Utah's Best of State Award. If you saved at least $200,000 and have not filed for Social Security, get this free report by calling 801-682-4448. This free report is loaded with critical information that can help you avoid losing $111,000 in Social Security income. So call 801-682-4448. That's 801-682-4448. Advisory services offered through Boss Retirement Advisors, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm. Insurance products and services offered through Boss Retirement Solutions.
Back in the day, a shoemaker was called a cobbler because the stone you walked on was called cobblestone. Or was it the other way around? But before you can walk on cobblestone, you have to lay it down. Of course, you can also use cobblestone in your garden or park strips, or, well, you get the idea. But where do you get good old-fashioned cobblestone? The dirt bag. Imagine the things you can do with it in your yard and garden. If you have an imagination, the dirt bag has what you need to bring that dream to life. Rock mulch? How about 11 different rock mulches? Playground chips for the kids? Yep, the dirt bag. For topsoil, sod, bark mulches, and pathway material called chat, the dirt bag. And with a dirt bag, your garden and yard you have in your imagination can be delivered right to your driveway. Or you can pick it up in bulk yourself. There's a reason everyone loves the dirt bag. Find out what the dirt bag can do for you at thedirtbag.com. Thedirtbag.com.
Getting help with electrical repairs is easier than you think. All you have to do is call Any Hour Services or schedule an appointment at anyhourservices.com. No one helps more homeowners than Any Hour Services.
Tim and Amanda.
In 20 minutes of listening to Utah's Morning News, you'll hear every breaking story that's happening.
To travel to work, you're going to find out how much time it's going to take you to get there.
You'll hear stories that help you address the problems, not just what the problems are.
Wake up with Utah's Morning News with Tim and Amanda, 5 to 9 on KSL News Radio.
This week's movie show brought to you by My Hearing Centers. Learn about the amazing new Signa X hearing aid and find out how you could win a free pair from My Hearing Centers.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, State School Board member Natalie Klein says she's been exonerated by a board investigation after a series of complaints. The board spokesperson, though, is saying not so fast. Second, Utah's Department of Public Safety has set up a process for someone in a private gun sale to do a background check on the buyer. And third, the president of Israel spoke to a joint session of Congress today, pointing out the threat posed by Iran to his nation and the United States. Right now, 90 degrees and partly cloudy in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Get deeper insights on the news from Inside Sources.
Well, for months now, Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville has been blocking nominees for military posts that require Senate approval. It's creating a bit of a backlog of people waiting to be confirmed into new positions. It's also postponed people actually transferring from base to base or moving families or getting kids ready for school. A lot of Democrats and others have been accusing Senator Tuberville of endangering national security. And we want to go past the headline of all of that and whether you agree or disagree with the senator's stance or his approach to making a point. The real question is he really stopping all of that, or is there actually a way within the Senate rules to actually get it done? And so when we need to get it done, as it relates to understanding what can be done in the United States Senate, we turn to James Wallner, Senior Fellow at the R Street Institute. And James, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you wrote a great piece talking about the fact that many of the Democrats, when these kinds of things come up, you have kind of the usual crowd, including an Elizabeth Warren, who immediately want to change the Senate rules to solve the problem. And you're saying they don't even need to change the rules because the rules really aren't the problem.
That's exactly right. The reason why Senator Tuberville has this power to hold all of the Department of Defense nominations is because Democrats and Republicans, for that matter, are letting him do it. And if they followed the rules, he wouldn't have the power. It's plain and simple.
And so explain that process in terms of the rules and what the senator could do, what he could not do, and what the other 99 senators can do to actually get these things done.
The Senate has rules and practices that are very clear about how you get a vote on presidential nominations. But the Senate doesn't like to follow those rules. It doesn't like to follow those rules ever for bills or for nominations. And so what it does is that senators go down to the floor and they ask unanimous consent to waive the rules and then, in effect, adopt a new rule for a particular bill or for a particular nominee. And in many cases, it's to just vote on the nominee right then and there, or in many respects, to approve the nominee without a vote at all. Senator Tuberville is saying, I don't want to give you my consent, which he has every right to do. It's unanimous consent after all. And they are now accusing him of doing something that he has this huge power to veto these nominees, when in reality, it's their efforts to get around the rules and waive the rules that's letting Tuberville do this.
Yeah, and so walk us through what that might look like. Obviously, we've got things like August recess coming up. We've got all of these, again, kind of this backlog that's been building over the last 5 months. If you had some boldness on both the left and the right side of the aisle in the United States Senate, what would it look like if they just said, you know what, we want to get all of these things done before we go to August recess or during August recess? What would that look like?
Well, Democrats right now, what they're really concerned with is a vote, in essence. They don't want to take the time to vote on a nominee, or in this case, lots of nominees. And they don't want to negotiate with Tuberville over the substance of his objection with regard to abortion policy. So they accuse him of vetoing Department of Defense nominees. But it doesn't take that much time. Remember the nuclear option. They've already ignored their rules and changed their rules without following them to lower the vote threshold to end debate on a nominee to a simple majority. So that you can have a vote on a nominee now, but to do that, you have to have up to 2 hours of debate equally divided after that vote to end debate. And that's too much time for them as well. And so in essence, they're complaining about the requirement that is, I think, constitutional, the advise and consent clause, and the provision in the Constitution that says that you have to have a vote if you have a sufficient second of number of senators that want to vote. They're complaining about that requirement. But again, there's ways around it. You can move to suspend the rules and move to confirm a bunch of nominees all at once. The rules lay out a process for that. They can use the cloture process. The rules lay out a process for that. If they don't want to use cloture, they can use Rule 19, which says you can only speak twice in any one given legislative day on any given subject. And a legislative day can last for a whole year, unlike a calendar day, because this is the United States Senate.
So many things to explore in there. Without going too deep into the weeds for our listeners, because I think this is the important takeaway from all of this, is we hear a lot of the chatter and a lot of the clamor from both sides, really. In this particular case, it is the Democrats using this as a good campaign tool to say, oh, look, this is just an abortion extremist over here in Senator Tuberville, and he's preventing our national security from happening because nobody can get promoted. If we did just the simple math, since this has been going on for 5 months now, even if they had gone with the traditional rule without any modifications, 2 hours per, they could have got through most of these just within the last 5 months anyway. Am I wrong?
Not at all. They have plenty of time. They have had plenty of time, and they still have plenty of time because the Senate doesn't do that much stuff. If they would only just follow their rules. But instead, as you said, I think it makes more political sense for them and electoral sense for them to accuse Senator Tuberville of having a power that, quite frankly, he doesn't have. If they want to vote on a nominee, then they shouldn't ask for his permission. And if they do, they shouldn't be surprised if he says no. After all, every senator has a right to say no when you ask unanimous consent.
Yeah, and then being able to actually just move that forward. I know there is one other option that can, at least in the short term, circumvent all of that, and that is doing something during recess. Just describe that quickly for us.
Well, the Constitution's advise and consent clause has another part, the recess appointments clause right after it, that empowers the president to put people in positions in the executive branch and on the federal judiciary, incidentally, for a temporary basis only when the House and Senate are in recess. However, because of in recent years, Supreme Court rulings on what constitutes a recess and controversies going back to President Obama, the House and Senate have to be out for a significant period of time for that to happen. And we've seen under both Democratic and Republican presidents, they don't recess, they don't adjourn, they kind of stay in temporarily, even when they're not there.
And often that looks like gaveling in, doing some naming of a post office by unanimous consent, and then they're back to being in some sort of session. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, a post office would be a lot of business sometimes, and most times it's just simply gaveling in, saying, okay, we're here, and then gaveling right back out. And no one is there. It's just the person who's gaveling in the Senate.
Fascinating stuff. And so this is just a critical part of all of this, because you hear a lot of the political chatter on this. There is a way to do it, and the way for it to get done is not for both sides to complain about the rules. It's to use the rules to actually do the job and get these military nominations all the way through. James Wallner, as always, appreciate your insight on the interworkings of the United States Senate and why the rules actually matter, and the process, when followed, actually produces the right result. James, of course, is senior fellow at the R Street Institute. James, thanks for taking a little time out from summer and joining us for a crucial conversation.
Thanks for having me.
I think that's so critical, because we're going to continue to hear this mount. And again, some of it's coming from political sides, the military side, and the reality when it comes to these promotions and these things that have to be approved by the Senate. The reality is, if the Senate will just do its job, they all could be done before they leave for August recess. This is more politics and theatrics than it is process in the United States Senate, and we have to get back to that, because that then becomes the national security issue. We'll step aside for some bottom of the hour news. More Inside Sources coming up next. Stick around.
It's 1:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomas. KSL's top story this hour. We have breaking news. A region of France now making a competing bid for the 2030 Olympic Winter Games. The Deseret News reports the bid from the Auvergne-Rhône Alps and Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur regions was announced after a French member of the International Olympic Committee suggested a late entry by the two mountain areas. Salt Lake City has been pursuing a bid for the Games in 2030 or 2034. The IOC was expected to announce a host for the 2030 Games last December, but decided to delay a decision until later this year. Salt Lake City police have released new details about the missing 12-year-old who was found safe early this morning. They say Santa Gloria Olvera had run away from home on Monday. She was found at the home of her 13-year-old boyfriend around 3:40 this morning. And officers say they found no evidence of physical injury or trauma. Officers say their investigation showed the person who had chased her in a home security video was that 13-year-old, but they say there's no evidence to indicate kidnapping or that the girl was in imminent danger. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. Texas has built its own version of a border wall in the form of floating barrels and razor wire in the Rio Grande near the town of Eagle Pass. And now pushback against that setup is growing ABC's Alex Stone has details.
Mexico argues the floating barrels and razor wire in the Rio Grande put there by Texas under the guidance of Governor Greg Abbott violate several international water treaties, and Mexico wants it all removed immediately. Some U.S. lawmakers have written the Biden administration the argument that the act of repelling a migrant who has stated the intent to seek asylum could be a violation of international and federal law. Texas argues it's necessary to stop the flow of migrants. Alex Stone, ABC News.
Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average up 128 points on the day so far. The NASDAQ is up 17 right now. And our KSL weather, the heat is coming. That's next. KSL News Time, 1:32.
Early mornings can be hard enough, just getting yourself going.
We try to make it a little easier with news and weather from comfortable, trusted anchors and reporters.
Join us on Utah's Morning News between 5 and 9
on KSL News Radio.
Did you know people travel to Logan from all over the country to see performances by Utah Festival Opera and Musical Theater? Why? It starts with 300 professional local and nationwide artists and staff coming together to create magical performances. First, Lohengrin, a mysterious knight, sails into town on a swan to rescue the lovely Elsa, who has been falsely accused of murder. The knight goes, "Don't ask me my name." Elsa goes, "Okay, I won't. Wait, what's your name?" Everything goes downhill from there. The plot's kind of weird, but the music is stunning, and it's only ever been performed 5 times in the United States. Next, Aida the opera version and Aida the Broadway version. See them both. So, Radames is captain of the Egyptian army. He's supposed to marry the pharaoh's daughter, but instead falls in love with Aida, the queen of the country he captured. They can't live without each other, so they don't, because they're sentenced to death and die in each other's arms. There's also Broadway's Oliver, the classic Our Town, plus concerts and more. Utah students from public and private schools get a free ticket to any or all performances and concerts this year. Don't miss out. UtahFestival.org.
Experienced buyers know the name Tiffin. They also know where to buy one, General RV. And during our Tiffin Motorhome Day sales event, these folks know they could save thousands. And so can you. From July 19th through the 22nd, you can get up to 40% off any Class A Tiffin motorhome. Plus, we've got the lowest prices in years. Yes, big motorhome savings are happening now, only at General RV in Draper off I-15.
At Your Service Pros Heating and Air recently received the following review on Yelp. "I'm so glad I got a second opinion from At Your Service Pros. They identified the same items of work to be done, but gave me a much more realistic quote. I'll definitely use them again. Thanks, Seth. We're glad we were able to do the repairs for less than half of what the other company quoted him. There's a reason we're one of the highest rated companies on both Google and Yelp. If you want a free second opinion on your HVAC repairs, give us a call at 801-YOUR-PRO. That's 801-YOUR-PRO.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Granite Credit Union's High Yield Savings Certificates. Here's Ricky Meese.
Well, they have cleared the crash in Provo Canyon, westbound Highway 189 at Canyon Glen Park, but there are residual delays from there going to the mouth of the canyon. Also, looking at a good drive on the Valley freeways, but an accident in Weber County, westbound 21st Street at 1100 West near the I-15 junction. It's Foothill Rug Gallery's semi-annual sale. Get the biggest savings of the year, up to 70% off. Foothill Rug Gallery's semi-annual sale, 1460 South Foothill Drive. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, hot again today, high of 97. And there's an ongoing chance for afternoon and evening thunderstorms. The weekend's looking really hot with temperatures as high as 105 on Sunday. 90 degrees and partly cloudy now at KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, and KSLNewsRadio.com. Your all-day companion for news.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Over the last year, Russia, China, and Iran have all been escalating conflicts of various sources in various ways, creating all kinds of problems for the United States and for allies around the world. As we start to look at the Biden administration's track record and really being able to discern kind of the model that they're operating on when it comes to foreign relations and foreign interactions, there are some really interesting trends beginning to emerge. And the question often comes back to this idea of, is it the peacekeeper, which is sort of avoiding conflict, always trying to scale things down, or is it peacemaker, where you're actually leaning into the principles that while they may escalate a few things, they also might lead to a strength and some lasting peace in the process? Mike Mazza is the non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he analyzes U.S. defense policy in the U.S. Pacific, in the Asia Pacific area. A great piece in National Review talking about the Biden administration's foreign policy. And Mike, welcome back to the show. And I want to start with just kind of this high-level thing. I love this piece in terms of looking at both a principle, some policies, and then some very specific applications when it comes to Russia, China, and Iran. So give us the high level first. What is it that you're seeing? What are you discerning when it comes to how they're really approaching foreign policy in the administration?
Thanks for having me. So my co-author, Shake Deary, and I wrote this piece because it's come to us as we looked at the Biden administration approach to the three countries you named, China and Iran, over the past couple of years.
Hey, Michael, I'm gonna hold you for just a second. We got a funny connection going on there. I'm gonna have our producer Bella give you a buzz right back so we can make sure we've got a good line there. I don't want to miss any of this content. So while we're getting Mike back on the phone, technology is awesome and live radio is amazing, and so sometimes we tap dance. So again, kind of laying this out from Mike Mazza from AEI, just talking about some of the things that we're starting to see emerge in terms of patterns. And it's always been a really interesting thing to me to watch. Of sometimes it's the de-escalate at any cost model, and sometimes it's the escalate model. And while sometimes when we think about peace, we think about de-escalating or avoiding. And that's not always the best policy when it comes to creating lasting peace. If you really want to be the peacemaker, sometimes you have to lean in, not lean out. When you're really going after peace, sometimes it requires you to ratchet things up a notch rather than always doing whatever possible to ratchet things down. And so, again, we got Mike back on the line. Mike, sorry about the technical difficulties there. Let's just pick it back up in terms of kind of your framing in terms of the principle that you're seeing driving the Biden administration's foreign policy.
Right, sure. And sorry about that. So, as I was saying, my co-author, Shake Deary, and I, when we look back at the past couple of years of the way the Biden administration has approached relations with the countries you named, Russia, China, and Iran, and when we look at the way it's responded to, a series of actions that they've taken, it seems to us that the Biden administration's overriding concern is to avoid escalation, to avoid tensions getting worse, to avoid risking armed confrontation.
Yeah.
And, obviously we want to try to avoid armed confrontation. That's not a political objective for the United States. But the political objective here seems to be a very negative one. And what I mean by that is we're not trying to positively shape the world we're living in. We're not trying to achieve foreign policy goals that, in theory we've set out for ourselves. We're just trying to avoid problems.
Yeah, and if you're always in that reactionary state as opposed to, I love the way you frame that, shaping what that should look like and be like. And let's start with Russia as an example. You used this in your piece with your colleague, talking about this idea that they have pursued, the administration has pursued, in terms of strategic stability. Kind of describe that and why that necessarily hasn't been a good path to lasting peace.
Yeah, so very, very early in the Biden administration, the United States sat down with Russia, and there was this, both countries agreed that to the pursuit of strategic stability. That's fine as far as it goes, but of course Russia turned around and the next year launched this major invasion of Ukraine. Right? It's now the biggest land war on the European continent since World War II. To the Biden administration's credit, it has done a lot in order to support Ukraine, sent Ukraine all sorts of weapon systems and ammunition in order to fight the war, provided intelligence assistance. Again, that's all positive. But running throughout the response is this urgent desire on the part of the Biden administration to avoid the conflict escalating into a war between Russia and NATO. And to be sure, that is something to be avoided. But the risk there, we would argue, is actually quite low and has been low in the past year and a half. And so because of this concern the Biden administration has that is somehow going to happen, right, that we're going to end up at war with Russia, we're not doing the sorts of things we should be doing to help bring this war to an end. And an end that results in Ukrainian victory and Russian defeat.
Yeah, I thought that was really important in your piece, just talking about the fact that the administration seems to have been slow, often in the name of we don't want to escalate things, or we don't want to be at war with Russia. Again, that's a good, noble cause for sure. We don't want that. But often this doing it so slow in a fear of ratcheting up, I think has actually caused things to ratchet up more. And as you said, we're now well over a year and a half into this, and not a lot of a great end in sight. Anything you're seeing on the horizon that might shift that or change that dynamic as it relates to Russia? And then we'll move on to China.
Again, to the administration's credit, I think it has slowly come to grips with the fact that it has been wrong in its risk assessments, right? So we do see this this approach in which the United States says no to the Ukrainians, and then the fourth or fifth time they ask for something, the Biden administration realizes, hey, this is not actually going to cause a big problem. So yes, you can have whatever the current weapon system we're talking about is. So that's positive that they seem to be learning from their mistakes. But my argument would be that the Biden administration is simply learning too slow and remains overly cautious. Again, there's the Biden administration and the president himself are very good about saying that the United States is going to stay with Ukraine as long as it takes. Mm-hmm. But we don't like to say we're doing this in order to bring about Ukrainian victory. Yeah. Right? So there's this caution that the administration just can't get past.
Yeah, that speed issue seems to be that ability to take on new information. We always talk about the OODA loop in terms of observe, orient, decide, act, and moving that over quickly is the real key in any kind of battle that way. Talk to us for a minute about how this same principle applies to how we're approaching policy as it relates to China.
Yeah, so the Biden administration, came into office and essentially said we're going to maintain the Trump administration's approach of competing with China, right? Understanding this relationship with China as one in which we are engaged in a competition. And again, I would argue that's a positive. But since very early in the administration, the president and other officials have been talking about placing guardrails on the relationship, making sure that the competition doesn't tip over into conflict. And again, the desire to avoid conflict is obviously admirable, but the outcome is that they are putting avoiding escalation ahead of winning the competition, right? And if they're framing the U.S.-China relationship as a competition, presumably they want to win that competition. Now, we can disagree and argue about what exactly that looks like, but what it has meant in practice is that the United States has shied away from taking, what I think would be really important steps to put China on its back foot, and that those steps could be taken without the significant risk of escalation that the Biden administration seems to think exists.
Yeah, and I think the way you closed out your piece, this is so important for our listeners, that you said that the escalation management is a strategic objective that should serve a political end, but the United States is ceding ground because the Biden administration has made escalation management in the administration the supreme political end. Just give us a 30-second snapshot of that and why we should be thinking about what we should be watching for in that space.
Yeah, the problem with the problem with telegraphing that your primary concern, virtually above all else, is avoiding escalation, means that your rivals, your adversaries, get to pick the time. Pick and choose the time that they want to escalate. They get to pick the location that they want to escalate, and because they know the administration fears escalation, they're willing to be aggressive, knowing that our instinct, or this administration's instinct, will be to act with restraint.
Absolutely. Great insight. This is a fabulous piece, and this really opened my eyes on a couple of things. Like, oh, that makes sense as to why they're doing some of those things. And in the end, I think it is leading us to a space not of functioning from a position of strength, but always seeking for that de-escalation when the real path might be leaning in and really going a little bit stronger. Michael Maz is the non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Great piece. You should check that out today. Mike, thanks so much for weighing in today.
Thanks for having me.
We'll step aside for a quick break. When we come back, we've been focusing on New Hampshire a lot this week. New Hampshire Governor John Sununu will not run for re-election in 2024, but he's also said he's not running for president. So what is he doing? Why does that matter? What does it tell us about where our politics is these days? Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's hot.
Along the Wasatch Front, temperatures are going back above 100. We do that every summer.
And it's sticking around.
It's not going to be unprecedented, but it's definitely going to be hot.
Get updates on temperatures and the forecast every 10 minutes on the 9s.
Find a cool place to spend the day.
Special coverage, the July heat wave on KSL News Radio.
Getting close to retirement? Or have you retired? You've probably got a ton of stress-filled questions on your mind. I'm Jeff Jr. with Trajan Wealth. Getting a second opinion with an individualized investment plan is vital, and our fiduciary advisors do just that. Take it from this Trajan Wealth client.
It was just so pleasant, so comfortable. I think we had 7 different accounts, just stuff scattered all over the place. And then so we just started, here's this, move this. And he even explained it a couple different times. But if I have more questions, he said, just give us a call. And that's what I love. He's a phone call away. Like, I'm glad I know these guys. Such a huge weight off my shoulder.
Imagine not second-guessing investments or monthly retirement income. That's the peace of mind you'll get from working with Trajan Wealth. Call 801-899-7600 today or visit TrajanWealth.com.
Actual client, no compensation, no conflicts. Advisory services offered through Trajan Wealth, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor.
Do you have heart failure and often hear,
"Those stomach issues ruined your birthday"?
"You're too tired to play catch, Grandpa."
Sweetie, you haven't touched your tools since the carpal tunnel syndrome diagnosis.
If these seemingly unrelated symptoms sound familiar, talk to your cardiologist. Ask about transthyretin amyloid cardiomyopathy, or ATTR-CM. A rare and underdiagnosed disease that gets worse over time. Learn more at connecttoyourheart.com. That's connecttoyourheart.com. Sponsored by Pfizer.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Losing weight is more than just a number on the scale. Boy, did I learn that. I started the SOTA weight loss program 1.5 years ago. I lost 34 pounds. And yes, watching the number on the scale go down was really great. Mm-hmm. But they helped me with a lot of other things, like why did I binge eat? Why did I used to sit down and not be able to stop if I started eating Wheat Thins? I'd eat the whole box of Wheat Thins. Why did I do that? And because ultimately, you're only going to be healthy if you can change the way you look at food. Your relationship with food has to change.
Yeah.
And SOTA weight loss helps you with the whole picture to help you get healthy.
Well, and heaven knows we need all the help we can get at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
But mental clarity and focus also becomes important for that weight loss journey. My daughter lost 42 pounds, and she's now in the maintenance phase, which simply means that she checks in with her nutritionist every couple of weeks just to make sure she's on track. They can help you or somebody in your family as well. Go to SOTAweightloss.com. It's spelled SOTA, stands for state of the art. Think Tim and Amanda. SOTAweightloss.com.
Tim Jr. here from RGS Exteriors. And let's face it, it's time to update the look of your home's exterior. When was that thing built? In the 50s, 70s, 90s, the 2000s? Well, it's looking like it. Faded siding, drafty windows, leaky gutters. It's time to take action now. RGS Exteriors has been taking Utah homes from drab to fab for over 5 generations. We only use the highest quality materials, like James Hardie siding and gutter topper gutter covers. You will be blown away by how much different and better and awesome your house can look. Your neighbors will be jealous, your home value will go up, and most of all, you're going to love it. Everything we do comes with our industry-leading 10-year everything guarantee, so you can sleep like a baby, knowing if anything goes wrong, you're 100% covered. For a free estimate on your gutters, windows, siding, or anything on your outside of your home, call RGS Exteriors at 801-280-3110 or visit us at rgsutah.com. That's rgsutah.com.
Hey, this is Chris with JCW's. Not feeling a burger? We've got you covered. Try one of our hot ribeye, turkey, or BLT sandwiches, and you'll understand why we say JCW's, quality and a lot of it.
With the three things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, two mountainous areas of France now making a new bid for the 2030 Winter Olympic Games. Utah has also been bidding for those games. Second, there's now a lawsuit demanding that Celeste Malloy be removed from the ballot in the 2nd District congressional race. And third, Texas has put its own barrier to illegal immigration in the Rio Grande. It's made of floating barrels and razor wire. Right now, 90 degrees, partly cloudy in Salt Lake City. And back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Get deeper insights on the news from Inside Sources.
Whole lot of attention going to New Hampshire, as it often does in political season. But this week in particular, of course, the No Labels group had their town hall there on Monday, laying out a series of policy proposals as they look to get on the ballot and potentially field a presidential nominee for 2024. But mostly an interesting conversation about more choices in the matter. Also looking today at Massachusetts and the New Hampshire governor, Chris Sununu, many who had rumors that he would join the Republican presidential race and then maybe the New Labels race. And now he's saying he's not even going to run for governor in a race. And helping us break all of that down, look at the ins and outs of it, Lisa Kaczynski is the author of the Massachusetts Playbook at Politico. So she understands what's going on up there in the Northeast. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So what do we make today of this announcement from Governor Sununu that he will not run for re-election in 2024? He clearly was poised, wouldn't have been a certainty, but probably had a pretty good chance of a re-election if he wanted to stay.
Yeah, he's still a very popular governor in New Hampshire and one of the most popular in the country, according to certain polls of that. Basically, this is something that Governor Sununu has been hinting at for a while now. Even before he decided he wouldn't seek the presidency, he had been hinting that he was looking to move on from the governor's office in New Hampshire. He has been there. He will be there by the end of next year for 8 years. It's in New Hampshire, it's 2-year terms for governor. So he's in his 4th term now, and he's choosing not to run for a 5th. And he, had said public service isn't, for a lifetime. He wants to make some money. He has kids to put through college. So this is something that was expected and now sets what will be a very contentious governor's race into motion.
Yeah, very interesting. I did love, I wanted to shout from the rooftops when he said public service should never be a career, and the time is right for another Republican to lead our great state. And whether it should be a Republican or a Democrat, that will be the debate, as you said, in a very contentious field for sure. But this whole idea of saying, hey, you know what, there are times to get out, to move on, to go back to the private sector, that tells us, I think, some interesting things in terms of where we are as a country. But the fact that someone can say, yeah, I'm okay stepping away for a while, I think has to be a good thing when we look at all of this.
Yeah, it's interesting because you also saw that from Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker. He chose not to seek a 3rd term. He was not term limited like some other governors, like Larry Hogan, these other moderate Republican governors. And Charlie Baker said, he looked at the political climate, he looked at what he'd done in Massachusetts, and also said, I'm good stepping aside. He was in a little bit of a different situation than Chris Sununu because Charlie Baker would have faced a much more contentious primary situation in Massachusetts and really just, didn't feel the need to put himself through that. Sununu probably would have had an easier time. He's really faced at most nominal competition on that side of things. But yeah, you are seeing that from some of these governors, that they're looking at this, they're saying, they feel it's okay to step aside. And part of that is a calculation with the political climate. I mean, you see these same governors who had all been floated for president who also said no to that.
Yeah, so interesting. Sadly, I think that leads us towards that kakistocracy where it's the least qualified end up governing because the people who are most qualified say that, that the climate, as you said, Lisa, is just not worth all of that in terms of family and just the whole contention and how that rolls. There are some interesting names that are already popping up in terms of who might go after that. Give us some sense of that.
So the Democratic primary had already started even before the governor said that he officially wasn't running again. Again, most people thought he wouldn't. So you have two pretty prominent Democrats in New Hampshire, an executive counselor named Cindy Warmington and the outgoing mayor of Manchester, bigger city in New Hampshire, Joyce Craig. They are already running and sort of kind of dividing the Democratic establishment in the state, which will be really interesting to see how that plays out. On the Republican side, you have some names that might be a little bit more known nationally. Former Senator Kelly Ayotte is poised to jump in. She kind of teased her announcement today, but didn't fully commit to it yet. She's very much expected to get in. And the state's former Senate President, Chuck Morse, who had ran unsuccessfully for U.S. Senate last year, is officially in the race now.
That's going to be really interesting to watch. Senator Ayotte, I think, will be really interesting in that space. She was actually in the Senate when I was back there as a chief of staff and did some really good things and clearly has a way of looking at an agenda in a little different way. So that will be interesting to see how that goes. Chuck Morse, as you mentioned, and I'm sure there will be a few others who will take a good hard look at that as we move along. But always New Hampshire gives us an interesting perspective of what's going on across the country. Lisa Kaczynski, author of the Massachusetts Playbook at Politico. Great piece as always. And Lisa, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, some great perspective there. And Chris Sununu is one of those political people who you look to and you say, okay, makes a lot of sense, practical, tactical, results driven, and you have someone of that quality. Again, whether you totally agree with his politics or not, set that aside for a second, and just look at someone who's achieved some real results in his state. And not only did he say no to another round, remember in New Hampshire, there are 2-year terms for governor there, so he'd been there for 8 years, four times elected, and he's saying, you know what, it's time to step aside. He also took a really hard look at running for president as a Republican and said, nope, I'm not going to do it. And I think that's a very interesting thing that we need to be looking at and think about some of these people who you could say, yeah, even if you're a center-left, a center-right person, that's somebody you could probably get behind or cast a vote for. And a lot of those people are saying, I'm going to go back to the private sector. I'm going to go home. I'm going to do family and community and try to make a difference a different way than politics. What does that tell us about our politics? That's what we're thinking about today. Well, that wraps up hour number 1 of Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. We will step aside for some top-of-the-hour news, but do not go anywhere. We are going to start the 2 o'clock hour with an incredible discussion about the power and importance of respectful dissent. We're going to take a lesson from a former Supreme Court Justice, John Marshall Harlan. Stick around for that. It is a fascinating conversation. We'll have that coming up hour number 2 right here on KSL News Radio.
KSL FM Midvale, KSL Salt Lake City. Listen on the KSL News Radio app and in your car at 102.7 FM. KSL News Radio, your all-day companion for news.
It's 2 o'clock at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomas. KSL's top story this hour. There's now a lawsuit calling for Republican Celeste Malloy to be removed from the ballot in Utah's 2nd congressional district race. Quinn Denning, who was beaten by Malloy at the convention, alleges she wasn't legally allowed to run because she wasn't a registered Republican at the time. She also says the lieutenant governor's office should not have certified her.
My whole motivation is election integrity and election transparency, and I don't think we've had either one of those.
Denning's suit is asking a trial court for an expedited ruling because ballots will go out for the primary in the next few days. Utah Transit Authority says its Fair Pay cards are working again. The tap-on, tap-off system on buses and trains went down this morning because of a software update. They say they had it fixed within an hour. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear is declaring a state of emergency to help parts of his state recover from mass flooding brought on by ongoing rainstorms. In a statement this afternoon, Beshear said the order will free up much-needed resources for the hardest-hit areas.
For all the communities that have been impacted, I am now signing a state of emergency, which will allow us to unlock state resources to help each and every one of those communities.
The hardest-hit areas are scattered around different parts of the state. Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average up 108 points on the day at this hour, and the NASDAQ at right now up just barely, about 4 points at this moment. And our KSL weather, hot, and then hot, and then it'll be hot. That's next. KSL News Time, 2:01.
What do you need to hear in the morning to feel ready for the day?
Important news that happened overnight, the traffic you'll hit on the roads.
You'll be ready for your day with us.
Join Utah's Morning News 5 to 9 on KSL News Radio.
Do you know why more homeowners choose Any Hour Services for help when it's time to replace their air conditioners? What's up, everybody? I'm Mike Wilson with Any Hour Services, and the main reasons people choose Any Hour Services is because of our people, processes, and convenience. People tell us all the time that there's just something different about having an Any Hour Services technician in their home. That's why most of our over 18,000 Google reviews mention our technicians by name. Another reason is our 7-step install process that we call the Any Hour Difference. It all starts with the needs analysis, where you explain what you like and dislike about your current system. This helps us design and size a system that fits your comfort and efficiency preferences as well as your home's airflow requirements. As for convenience, most of our installs are completed in one day. We also have flexible, no-money down financing options available, even if you've been told no in the past. So if you've been thinking about getting a new air conditioner, call Any Hour Services and schedule a free estimate today. Google Any Hour Services or schedule online at anyhourservices.com. No one helps more homeowners than Any Hour Services.
Earn $57,000 a year after just 2 years as a transportation security officer at Salt Lake International Airport. Learn more at a TSA job fair on July 25th at the Airport Business Park on 2220 North, 2200 West from 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. Positions start at $22.49 per hour and include full federal benefits and a potential pay raise after 6 months. Register at jobs.tsa.gov/events. That's jobs.tsa.gov/events. U.S. citizenship required.
My name is Juanita Segura, and I was diagnosed in November of 2014 with non-small cell lung cancer. The first time I heard about biomarker testing was actually my husband. He just started researching about lung cancer.
And I found out about biomarker testing, and I'm like, why not? Let's try it.
I'm Dr. Jorge Gomez, thoracic medical oncologist at the Mount Sinai Hospital. Comprehensive biomarker testing is looking for either substances in the blood or mutations in some of the genes of the cancer cells that can help us identify special types of lung cancer that can be treated with what we call targeted therapies.
Letting my children know brought all of us a sense of hope. To give them hope that mom is going to be around to see you grow up. And I promised them that.
Ask your doctor about how comprehensive biomarker testing before treatment may help you and your doctor decide on the best treatment for you. Visit noonemiss.org for more.
A public service message from Longevity Foundation.
If this were a Reese's TV ad, you'd be staring at a Reese's peanut butter cup. And sure, my voice is peanut buttery smooth, but still, you need to see the peanut butter cups, right? No? I can really just say Reese's and you'll go get some? Okay. Reese's. 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 Really working, actually. Reese's. Reese's. I'm on to something. Reese's. Reese's. Reese's.
The UACPA supports certified professional accountants in Utah through ongoing professional education and leadership development for an ever-changing financial world. Find a CPA at uacpa.org.
Traffic and weather together, brought to you by Granite Credit Union's high-yield savings certificates. Here's Ricky Meese.
We're back to a crash-free commute on your valley freeways and your main secondaries. And also good news, delays have cleared out westbound on Highway 189 in Provo Canyon as you're passing Canyon Glen, but we do have road work restricting lanes of travel in Provo Canyon near Vivian Park. Gillette Heating and Air Conditioning is offering spring air conditioner tune-ups for only $59. Call 801-825-4500 to schedule today. A Carrier Factory authorized dealer. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, hot again today, high of 97. An ongoing chance for afternoon and evening thunderstorms. The weekend's looking really hot, with temperatures as high as 105 on Sunday. Right now, 90 degrees, partly cloudy at KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, and KSLNewsRadio.com. Your all-day companion for news.
Inside Sources.
Inside Sources.
America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
A lot of headlines, a lot of divisiveness around the Supreme Court lately. Many of those disagreements have turned into disparagement. It's undermined the confidence that citizens have in the court. It's also undermined the confidence and trust that we have in each other. So as we fight and debate in our country about headlines around the Supreme Court and the role it should play in interpreting the law, it's often helpful to go past the headline and actually to go back in history for some proper perspective about the power of what one person can do and the proper role of dissent. Let's begin.
Think you know the news of the day? Think again with Boyd Matheson on KSL News Radio.
Well, there's been a lot of chatter and clamor as it relates to the Supreme Court these days, but there's a lot of great history within the Supreme Court that we often just don't get around to. And I think it's so vital that we remember that the things that we don't remember, the things that we ignore or forget, our children may not know, and what our children do not know, our grandchildren are unlikely to possess. And I think as it relates to the court, we talk about dissent. And I don't think we talk enough about the power and importance of a proper, respectful, insightful dissent. Our next guest has written extensively about the great dissenter, someone you probably didn't wake up thinking about this morning, the story of John Marshall Harlan, America's judicial hero. And Peter Canellis is Politico's managing editor for Enterprise. He's also the author of this book, The Great Dissenter. And Peter, we are just thrilled to have you on the show today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Boyd.
So let's start with a little bit of the backstory. I have to know, what is it that led you to John Marshall Harlan on the Supreme Court and truly one of America's judicial heroes?
I was a law student and had sort of an organic experience of reading the dissents of John Marshall Harlan, mostly in cases involving race, in which the majority of the Supreme Court took away the rights that had been granted to Black people after the Civil War. Harlan was a dissenter in those cases. He also was a dissenter in cases that really limited the government's power to deal with some of the terrible inequalities that we saw during the Gilded Age. He was on the Supreme Court from 1877 to 1911. That was a time of tremendous income inequality. And so 100 years later, reading those cases in law school, you were struck by how this one person who was a sole dissenter, the only dissenter in most of those cases, could sort of get the law so right by our contemporary feelings, even though everybody else at the time felt that he was wrong. So it seemed like just a powerful story about prescience, about the value of sort of laying down a marker, about how, you know, an idea that is very unpopular in its time can really change the world in a later generation. So that's what drew me to John Marshall Harlan.
It is so powerful, and as you pointed out, on a lot of these crucial cases around civil liberties and civil rights, he was the only one of the nine, one that had to be uncomfortable. Again, especially in the time, it would have been much easier for those to just be 9-0 decisions as opposed to 8-1. But as you said, he was clearly visionary in terms of how he was interpreting the Constitution and the application of the law. Give us some sense in terms of how that really played out. What was it about John Harlan that enabled him to be the lone voice? That's not easy in our society today.
Absolutely. Well, he had a lot of unusual qualities for his time. For one thing, he came from Kentucky when almost all of his colleagues had been born in the Northeast. Some of them had moved to other parts of the country and become successful attorneys in places like Detroit and Chicago and even California in one case. But Harlan, was born and bred in Kentucky, and so he had several things that they didn't have. One is Kentucky was sort of the epicenter of all the controversies before the Civil War. So he understood how a problem like allowing slavery under the Constitution can lead to discord, and came to believe that inequality under the law was itself a sort of accelerant of problems. He also had personal experiences dealing with black people, including a black man who was presumed to be his half-brother, who then became very wealthy and became politically powerful. And so he saw that when black people's rights were protected, they were capable of being not just, full-fledged citizens, but, enjoying all the success that white people aspired to. So he had this sort of different perspective on the law that played out economically, but it also played out in those race cases.
Yeah, and as you dive into those, some of the language is just so rich in these dissents that is so instructive for where we are today. You quoted one in your Politico piece talking about that the government shall not permit the seeds of race hate to be planted under sanction of law. And then you continued on, what can more certainly arouse race hate, what more certainly create and perpetuate a feeling of distrust. I think all of those are so, they're probably more timely now than ever before, even though there's been great strides in many areas. I think the core, as you said, he laid down the markers of those principles so far in advance, but they're still so important for us today.
They really are, and I think that, what you could hear in those words that you were quoting from him was his experience with slavery in the years leading up to the Civil War. He grew up in a family that was very, very patriotic and believed in the greatness of America and that America was the great hope for the world at a time when everybody else was living under some form of despotism. But he gradually came to believe that slavery was kind of the one flaw in the Constitution that had to be corrected, and that this terrible, painful war that he fought in on the Union side was sort of the price the country paid for that flaw. And he didn't want to allow those kinds of flaws to embed themselves in the law in the future. So therefore, he's pushing for very strong enforcement of equal protection under the law, which is the direct language of the 14th Amendment. And what's interesting is that today, there's this tremendous dispute, things like originalism and textualism. But Harlan's life offers sort of lessons for both sides. He did believe in the original intent of the Constitution. And in his case, the original intent was to bring black citizens up to a level of equality. He also believed strongly in a just result, that, we're not just pursuing an academic exercise in interpreting the Constitution. We're trying to apply its teachings to real-life human beings, which is something that I think some of our conservative justices these days may have lost track of. And, the court itself has become much, much more academic. So Harlan was a person who had a, red-blooded American life and was able to use that to achieve a kind of wisdom in the law.
I love that wisdom in the law. I think that is such an important piece of the puzzle because it's not an academic exercise. It's that application under the law that matters. Another great quote you had in there that I think leads us to a really interesting space, and that is this idea that what the nation through Congress, which I think is an interesting thing, that even at that time, he was saying, Congress, if you do your job, we'll have less things to adjudicate over here in the Supreme Court. But says that has sought to accomplish in reference to that race is what has already been done in every state of the Union for the white race, to secure and protect rights belonging to them as free men and citizens. And it leads to an area where I think there's some of the controversy in terms of that interpretation and what it is in terms of the Constitution being colorblind. And it's been pointed out that in some ways, people have bent that to their point of view, to say either this was an evil design or this is exactly what we've been saying. And I think what he was really telling us is that we have to look at this differently in terms of the law.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that people can engage in interpretation of the law in many different ways. And it's totally fair game to look at some of the phrases that someone like Harlan put down and say, well, what does that mean? Does he support affirmative action? Does he not support affirmative action? I have my own thoughts on that. You have your own thoughts on that. We all have our own thoughts on that. But what I would say is that it should not diminish our appreciation of Harlan if somebody with whom we disagree is sort of seizing on Harlan's, phrase, one of his most famous phrases is the Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. Now, liberals, including Thurgood Marshall, look at that and say, yes, so when we enact affirmative action, we're actually enforcing the 14th Amendment. We're enforcing the idea of colorblind justice because people have been held down for so long. This is helping bring people to a state of equality. People who are conservatives say, well, these laws that are doing that do make distinctions among races, so therefore Harlan would disagree with it. It's possible to have that debate, but to do it in a way that is respectful of Harlan's unique legacy before the court. So that's the one thing we have to guard against these days is that some of these historical figures get identified with partisan viewpoints today. And Harlan is a person who has been, pretty much uniquely embraced by both sides, and we should celebrate that.
Yeah, and you raise such an important point, and I think this is something that you have done brilliantly, and that is when we go back in history, it really is like going to a foreign country. They do things different. They think about different things. Their words are different and have different meaning than we do today, and it's so easy to be the loud American, so to speak, going to that foreign country of history and judging it based on where we are today or trying to superimpose, our agenda or political point of view. And I think you've done a brilliant job of creating space for John Harlan to speak and to say, look, here are the words, and here's how everybody can take a look at those in maybe a little different way.
Absolutely. That's, these historical figures are here to guide us, and we have to, make an effort to sort of read them properly, read them in the context of their time, understand the ways in which they were wise and they were different from some of the other people in their era, and take from it, something inspiring. And that's what we can do with Harlan.
The power and importance of proper, respectful, insightful dissent. Why we shouldn't stop talking about Justice John Marshall Harlan of the Supreme Court. We're going to continue and stay with the conversation with Peter Canellis from Politico coming up next. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson. This Friday, whether you're getting out of town or simply trying to get around town,
let's go for a little ride.
We're adding more traffic coverage for anyone that stops by.
Why? Because we like you.
Triple Team Traffic for the 24th starts Friday at noon on KSL News Radio.
You want to experience the benefits of going for the gold? You can do that at Hercules Credit Union. Open a checking account at Hercules Credit Union and qualify for gold tier status within the first 90 days, and Hercules Credit Union will deposit $200 into your account. That's a good way to get things rolling over the summer. Mention that you heard this ad on KSL, and you'll get that $200. Again, qualify for gold checking status and all the benefits that go with it. You have identity theft protection, travel benefits, cellular care coverage, health and wellness savings, and a host of other things that come from Hercules First Federal Credit Union. Again, great opportunity to go for the gold and to take control of your financial future. That's what Hercules is all about. You can check out their locations in Taylorsville, Harriman, Riverton, and Salt Lake City. Or, as always, with our friends at Hercules Credit Union, you can find them online at HerculesCU.com. That's HerculesCU.com.
At SimpliSafe, we've designed award-winning home security with advanced sensors, HD cameras, and now this, 24/7 LiveGuard protection, only from SimpliSafe. Now, monitoring agents can see and speak to intruders through our new indoor camera to help stop crime in real time and for fast police response. Get 20% off any new system with Fast Protect monitoring at simplisafe.com/radio. Advanced home security, 24/7 professional monitoring for less than $1 a day. There's no safe like SimpliSafe.
Yeah, I'm so stressed. Our business is growing. We've got people all over now.
Ooma.
What is that? Meditation?
I'm recommending the Ooma cloud phone system with auto attendant and more than 50 features.
Ooma?
Yep. Switching to Ooma is a cinch. Just $24.95 per month per user, plus taxes and fees.
Ooma.
Now you're feeling it. Find small business calm at ooma.com/radio. That's OOMA.com/radio.
You thought there'd be a real estate crash, didn't you? And you thought you'd be able to buy a house for less money and at a lower interest rate, right? Sorry, the crash didn't happen. You see, there's a shortage of homes in Utah and Idaho, and that's why prices are stable or even going up 5 to 10%. If you keep waiting for the crash, it's just going to cost you more money. That's why you need to get a hold of Rick at loansbyrick.com today. If the going interest rate is 6 to 7%, don't panic. In the next 1 to 2 years, Rick will probably be able to help you refinance your home mortgage below 5%. If you find your dream home, don't wait. Today's interest rate will not be your forever interest rate, and home values will go up. So if you wait to buy it, it will cost you more money in the long run. Here's the guy who can sort it out for you. Rick at loansbyrick.com. Call or text Rick at 801-809-SAVE, 801-809-SAVE, or click loansbyrick.com. Rick Kirschenbaum, NMLS 241179 and Vintage Lending, NMLS 287106 are equal housing lenders. Some restrictions apply.
The Utah Division of Emergency Management says, make a plan, get a kit, be informed, get involved. Visit BeReadyUtah.gov for information on how to prepare your family for any emergency.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, a lawsuit from a candidate who lost at the Republican convention is demanding Celeste Malloy be removed from the 2nd District primary election ballot. Second, 2 mountain regions of France are submitting a late bid for the 2030 Winter Olympics. Salt Lake City's been working on its bid for several years. Third, Kentucky's governor has declared a state of emergency because of widespread flooding. Right now, 90 degrees, partly cloudy in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
If you're just joining us, we're staying with the conversation just a little bit longer. We're talking to Peter Canellis. He's a managing editor for Politico. His book is on the former Supreme Court Justice John Harlan, known as the Great Dissenter. He gave legal dissent on cases during a time when the court was removing a lot of the rights and progress that were made in the course of the Civil War and post-Civil War period, and that power of being the dissenter. What that means and how you do that, and how you do that with confidence, how you do that with grace and respect, and how you do that in a way that moves the conversation forward. In many of these cases, he was the lone one. It was 8-1 at the Supreme Court, with Harlan being that dissenting voice. So in continuing my conversation with Peter Canellis, I asked him to talk a little bit about the history. The history matters, the setting matters. So I had him describe a little bit about the period, what was going on in society during Harlan's time on the Supreme Court.
Well, it was a tremendous time of upheaval, both on the racial front, because you'd fought the Civil War, and all of the gains of that war were sort of plugged into these post-Civil War amendments to the Constitution, the 14th, the 15th, the 16th Amendment, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, not the 16th. It then fell to the court to interpret those amendments, and there was tremendous disagreement about how to do that, and there was tremendous resistance to true equality for Black Americans. So there was a lot of tension on the racial front. It was the start of segregation. Also, huge tension on the economic front, with waves and waves of immigration coming in, which drove down wages and led to tremendous wealth for some and tremendous poverty for others. And how did society deal with that? And as I said before, Harlan offered sort of a unique perspective on that. But one other thing that sort of popped out is that the Supreme Court was much more conservative than the country on all of those issues. It was the Supreme Court that was sort of the obstacle there, not Congress, not the White House. At various key moments, Congress kind of stepped up to try to address the national problems, but they were often shot down by the Supreme Court. So it shows, among other things, the sort of centrality of the court to American life.
Yeah, such an important part of that. I want to go to something else you included in your Politico piece. And again, talking about these people from a different time. You talked about the fact that you look at them and the period that they were in, and the fact that it doesn't mean that every person is fated to share that certain bias, that anyone who's responded to those peculiar challenges of a time, that we can't just, cast an aspersion or undermine or, again, reshape, as we often do, historical figures to meet whatever our current need is politically or otherwise. And you got to something that I thought was so important for us, and I want to dig into this a little bit in terms of your thinking around it. And that is, as we look at public discourse, that if we don't recognize those who are breaking the mold, that those that are standing up and speaking out and even standing alone, It seems like we are in this society that the first thing we want to do is undercut them, cast the aspersion on them if it doesn't quite fit where we are. What is the lesson there for our time that came out of John Marshall Harlan?
Well, the lesson is that you learn a lot more from history if you look at it in a balanced way. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And we do have tendencies today, again, on both sides of politics, to make rash, quick judgments. On the left, there's a tremendous suspicion that anyone who lives in an era other than ours embodies prejudices and biases of that era. In the right, there's a sense that people who lived in earlier times embraced some sort of higher wisdom from that era or something. Right. The bottom line is that, history is more dynamic, and that what we have to do is look at how these individuals confronted the challenges of their time and take away from it what can help us confront the challenges in our time.
So important. As you went through this deep dive, and this is a serious deep dive, anything surprised you coming out of all that in all of your research?
I mean, a lot surprised me. I mentioned the centrality of the Supreme Court to American life. That was one big thing. I also was surprised at the extent to which dissents actually do mirror change later in history, and that when Harlan was writing these dissents, there was a lot of people that felt that he was like a wolf baying at the moon. And what actually happened is that they set in motion, in some cases, political arguments, like he had dissented in a case in which the Supreme Court had declared the income tax unconstitutional. Well, that dissent was read in the well of Congress and was set in motion forces that actually led to a constitutional amendment to bring back the income tax. In the race cases, like in Plessy v. Ferguson, the big segregation case, his words inspired Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley and other of the famous civil rights attorneys of the 20th century to challenge segregation and to use Harlan's arguments in their own briefs to do that. So it's not a purely academic exercise to file a dissent in some of these cases. So it actually does create a pathway to change. And I think that's a good lesson for today's jurists, but it's also a good lesson for just average people trying to make change in their own lives.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And just a final thought from you, Peter. What is we always like to get to the therefore what of it all. As you've gone through this process, a great book, extraordinary stuff on a historic figure that we don't talk nearly enough about. What is it? What is the therefore what for you? What do you hope people who read this think different? What do you hope they do different as a result?
I hope that they appreciate not just Harlan as a figure, but the challenges that Harlan confronted in his life and in his time, but that they also draw inspiration from it. Because I think this is really an essential story about how the law grows and changes and ebbs and flows, and to sort of understand that crucial dimension to American democracy, the legal system. This is an important narrative to read. So that's why I want people to understand Harlan in the proper context.
Peter Canales is a political managing editor for Enterprise and author of the 2021 book, The Great Dissenter, the story of John Marshall Harlan, America's judicial hero. There is so much in here. I encourage you to go out and check this out. Also, the political piece is a fantastic read as well as you look for things today. It will change the way you think. It will change the way you look at what's happening at the Supreme Court, why dissent matters, and just the power and importance of that proper, respectful, insightful dissent, and that we can have those kinds of conversations. And when we look to those in history who have dissented at crucial moments under difficult circumstances, we learn a lot of things that will add to our own character and to the character of the country. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was a great interview.
More Inside Sources coming up next.
It's 2:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomas. KSL's top story this hour. Hot temperatures in the state have led to several incidents of roads buckling under the heat, but the Utah Department of Transportation's John Gleason says it's only happening in northern Utah, even though it's even hotter down south.
We primarily use asphalt in southern Utah because there's not as much traffic down there. This is an issue, road buckling, that's exclusive to concrete pavements.
Gleason says the amount of traffic we have along the Wasatch Front requires using concrete on the freeways since it's a more durable surface. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. The record-breaking heat in Phoenix is taking a deadly toll. ABC's Alex Stone has details.
Maricopa County is reporting 6 more heat-related deaths since last week. That means this summer, 18 people have died related to heat in the Phoenix area, as ruled by the medical examiner, and there are 69 more deaths suspected to have been heat-related but still under investigation. The most deaths have been in people over 75 years old. 6% were 5 to 19 years old. About 2/3 of the victims were not homeless. Alex Stone, ABC News.
And your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average up 109 points at the close of trading today. S&P was up 10. The NASDAQ up just 4 points. And our KSL weather going to be hot, really hot again this weekend. That's next. KSL News Time, 2:31.
We have enough people running around Broadcast House at 4 in the morning to field a football team.
Producers, reporters, the traffic team, and us.
This is Tim and Amanda.
Join us each morning from 5 to 9 on KSL News Radio.
When words come out of our mouths and everything sounds fine, no one bats an eye. But if things come out a little jumbled or letters sound different than most, there's speech therapy. But did you know that speech therapy is used for more than just stuttering or dysfluency? From articulation to expressive and receptive language to a simple act of swallowing that most of us take for granted, speech therapy can do amazing things for you, your health, and of course your sense of self. That's why Summit Speech Therapy is here. Summit Speech Therapy works with people of all ages, from infants and toddlers who have a difficult time feeding or eating, TBI, stroke, or coma patients, to children and adults with speech problems. So much of it is all related, and Summit Speech Therapy can help. Summit works with all insurance companies as well as private pay options, and the experience can be life-changing. With clinics up and down the Wasatch Front, including Murray, with no long waiting for an appointment. For more, visit summitslp.com. That's summitslp.com.
I guess it's human nature, Amanda, that no matter how much money we have in our savings account, it never seems like it's enough. And if you find yourself in that mode right now, let us direct you over to our friends at UCCU. They are wanting to help you supercharge your savings.
UCCU is offering high-rate savings options with yields up to 5.5%. All you do is go to uccu.com and select a high-rate savings option to do just what you said, supercharge your savings.
You're going to get a much bigger return on your savings right now. It's a savings certificate, which means you make one deposit up front and your money grows over a fixed period of time. So you can have that grow over 5 years, but UCCU has created some very short-term savings certificates with high yields, short like 6 months, 9 months, or a year.
So you decide how long do you want to put that money. You deposit money, a one-time only deposit, and then you let it stay in. The longer it stays in there, the higher the interest rate you earn.
And if you need immediate access to your money, UCCU's Money Market will give you a high yield and anytime access.
UCCU, you're going to love where you bank.
Everybody knows that exterior remodeling salespeople are all about the high-pressure sell. Am I right? Windows, siding, gutters, those suckers are going to twist your arm and get you to buy, or they won't leave your house at night. Tim Jr. here from RGS Exteriors, and I want you to know we don't have high-pressure sells. In fact, we don't even have salespeople. Nope, we have estimators. That's a huge difference. Estimators are trained to look at the entire scope of the project, to see and know if there are any problems, like rotten wood, wood-borne insects, or construction issues specific to your house or your neighbors. Salespeople are more concerned about playing those silly price games. Buy one, get one free, sign today and get 40% off, as if they didn't just jack the price up to give you a fake discount. RGS Exteriors estimators are going to give you a great quote. No games, no tricks, no nonsense. Call RGS Exteriors to quote your exterior project. Our number is 801-280-3110 or visit us at rgsutah.com. That's rgsutah.com.
Traffic and weather together, brought to you by Granite Credit Union's high-yield savings certificates. Here's Ricky Meeks.
We have delays. This may be due to road work. I don't have a crash reported, but look for this in West Valley southbound Mountain View corridor between 3500 and about 4500 South Valley Freeway. Traffic still in really good shape. Fill up your bucket list in Box Elder County. History, recreation, and wildlife, along with excellent dining and shopping, await you. Find out more at visitboxeldercounty.com. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
KSL weather, hot again today, high of 97, and there's an ongoing chance for afternoon and evening thunderstorms. The weekend's going to sizzle with temperatures as high as 105 on Sunday. Right now, 90 degrees, partly cloudy at KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, and KSLNewsRadio.com. Your all-day companion for news.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson. On Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
And he really didn't fight back against Prigozhin. He cut a deal to save his skin using the good offices of the leader of Belarus.
That's the voice of the chief of Britain's MI6, Richard Moore, also known as C in the international community. He gave a rare speech in Prague earlier today. He gave the first confirmation from Western intelligence that Prigozhin, the boss of the Russian mercenary Wagner Group, cut a deal with Vladimir Putin after leading a mutiny, and that Putin was really cutting the deal to save himself. Richard Moore also went on to do an interview with Politico. The MI6 boss said even he was confused with Vladimir Putin's behavior following the mercenary mutiny leading towards the streets of Moscow.
That particular Saturday when Prigozhin made his move, his sort of extended road trip through Rostov and approaching Moscow, it was extraordinary. If you look at Putin's behaviors on that day, Prigozhin started off, I think, as a traitor at breakfast. He had been pardoned by supper, and then a few days later he was invited for tea. So there are some things down that even the chief of MI6 finds it a little bit difficult to try and interpret in terms of who's in and who's out.
We could just dissect that little snippet right there of 30 seconds and all the things that the MI6 boss said and didn't say as he was describing the road through Rostov on the way to Moscow. And by the end of the day, he was having tea and supper and a deal with Vladimir Putin that made even someone who is as knowledgeable on all these things as Richard Moore, as the head of MI6, said even he was a little bit baffled. He went on to say that Vladimir Putin is facing a lot of pressure from inside of Russia, within Russia, especially from other Russian elites.
It also, I would say, he is clearly under pressure. You don't have a group of mercenaries advance up the motorway towards Moscow and get to within 125 kilometers of Moscow unless you have not quite predicted that was going to happen. So I think he probably feels under some pressure. Prigozhin was his creature, utterly created by Putin, and yet he turned on him.
And that's always the important factor. We often say that it's not about who storms the castle, or in this case, who storms the Kremlin. It's who is there to defend it. And it seems to be pretty quiet, starting with those Russian elites who were pretty quiet as Prigozhin marched his way towards Moscow. And now in the aftermath of all of that, one of the things that Richard Moore went on to say was that these deep fractures in Russia are actually a byproduct of the war in Ukraine, something that Vladimir Putin just simply did not foresee.
It also, I would say, is a real indication of how Putin can't contain the impact of his invasion of Ukraine within the borders of Ukraine. And what we're seeing here is, if you like, the instability caused by the appalling casualties that the Russians are suffering on the battlefield, sort of bleeding back into the Russian body politic in a potentially destabilizing way.
The boss of the MI6, this is such a unprecedented look behind the curtain in terms of British intelligence, what they know, what they have been tracking and watching, and obviously being there in Europe, it's very close to home to them. Not only in just dealing with Ukraine and Russia, but how it impacts all the other allies that they have in Europe. And so the behind the scenes of all of this is really interesting and very revealing. A lot of head scratchers, a lot of wow moments for me listening to all of this. And one of the things that the boss of the MI6 said relating to China also caught our attention. He actually said that China is complicit in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and so is Iran.
Those three countries are sort of pushing themselves together. It's not like anybody else is pushing them together. And Iran has chosen to, presumably, to earn cash, as well as probably to receive some military know-how in return to support the Russians. The Chinese have lent very heavily in support of Russia since the outset of Ukraine, despite the fact that, of course, in his invasion of Ukraine, Putin tramples over two really critical international principles, those of national sovereignty and those of territorial integrity, which the Chinese government proclaims to be ones that it believes in, and yet very clearly it's taken the side of Russia.
Wow, there's just so much in this interview. So first he's calling out Iran, saying that, look, Iran is taking cash and probably some military know-how in return for their support of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and Ukraine's sovereign territory. The Chinese, he says, have lent heavily in support of Russia from the very beginning. And there's a lot of things I'm sure that we don't know about, or things that they're not telling us about in terms of what China and Russia have actually done. And so I think that's an important undercurrent there. But I also thought it was very instructive the way he described that these three countries, China, Russia, and Iran, are pushing themselves together. So often in these kinds of things, you say, well, you have to be careful in terms of the escalation because you may, push three bad actors together, and that might form an alliance or an axis of evil, I think, as President George W. Bush liked to call it. But here, the boss of the MI6 is saying, no, these three countries are pushing themselves together. And so this goes back to actually where we started the show today and talking about some of these undercurrents in terms of what is actually going on and how it is that this idea that the Biden administration's hyper-focus on de-escalation has actually caused things to get worse in many areas around the world, as opposed to leaning into the principles that actually may have created some escalation, but not necessarily all-out war, but may have changed the tide in terms of having a position of strength to function from and a way to actually ensure that freedom becomes that net result. And so it's one of those, you have to be very careful in terms of this because the Biden administration stepping back, always looking to de-escalate, has actually created space for these three countries in particular to come together. And they're pushing themselves together out of convenience, out of power, out of need for cash and military know-how. And that's going to be one of those areas that we have to just continue to keep our eye on. Again, this is an extraordinary interview from the MI6 chief, Richard Moore, and really an unprecedented look at what he's thinking as he watches it from his unique perch as the head of the MI6. Now, prior to this interview that he did, he actually gave a speech, also pretty rare, and he began with this most extraordinary appeal to the Russian people.
There are many Russians today who are silently appalled by the sight of their armed forces pulverizing Ukrainian cities, expelling innocent families from their homes, and kidnapping thousands of children. I invite them to do what others have already done this past 18 months and join hands with us. Our door is always open. We will handle their offers of help with the discretion and professionalism for which my service is famed. Their secrets will always be safe with us. And together we will work to bring the bloodshed to an end.
That is Richard Moore, the boss of Britain's MI6. And you're going to want to go back and re-listen to some of those pieces of sound. And this segment will be up in our podcast a little later on this afternoon because it gives you an extraordinary look behind the curtain and behind the scenes in terms of what's going on, how the deal came about between Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, and Vladimir Putin, that it was more Putin in need of Prigozhin than Prigozhin needing protection from Putin, and all of these other components in terms of China and Iran, a lot of the other things going on with the elites inside of Russia, ending in a speech, a rare speech from the MI6 boss, as the MI6 boss made an appeal to the Russian people to say the door is open, your secrets are safe with us, and you need to join hands with us because we know you have been appalled at what has been going on in Ukraine, as have we, and together we can bring it to a peaceful end. All right, we'll step aside for one last commercial break. When we come back, some final thoughts, Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Hi, Doug Wright, and let's talk about your barbecue. And let's talk about your barbecue skills. Maybe that old barbecue of yours was buried under the snow and you're just now in the process of getting it functional again. Now, we know you grill a pretty mean steak, but how about if we just all relax? It's July. We've been doing a lot of celebrating lately. It's time to get into Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. Why not let them grill the perfect steak for you and for your family? Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, they have 2 locations, Hotel Park City and, of course, downtown Salt Lake City. A lot of people like to kind of mesh things together. They're going to a ball game, going to a movie, or they're going to go up hiking in Summit County in the Park City area. Well, they make the reservation for that evening at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and you're going to have the best steak you have ever had. And the desserts, the side dishes, the other entrees too. It's Hotel Park City and 275 Southwest Temple in downtown Salt Lake City.
Introducing Yes Heating, Air Conditioning, Plumbing, and Electric. We're bringing all of Utah's favorite HVAC, plumbing, and electrical brands under one roof. Protect your family with a complete whole home generator from the pros at Yes Heating, Air Conditioning, Plumbing, and Electric. Call today and save up to $1,000 when you purchase a new generator from Yes. Don't be left in the dark. Schedule your free power evaluation from the expert technicians at Yes today. Call now or visit theyesmancan.com for details, terms, and conditions.
My brother-in-law died suddenly, and now my sister and her kids have to sell their home. That's why I told my husband we could not put off getting life insurance any longer. An agent offered us a 10-year, $500,000 policy for nearly $50 a month. Then we called SelectQuote. SelectQuote found us identical coverage for only $19 a month, a savings of $369 a year.
Whether you need a $500,000 policy or a $5 million policy, SelectQuote could save you more than 50% on term life insurance. For your free quote, call SelectQuote at 1-800-330-1991. That's 1-800-330-1991. Or go to SelectQuote.com. That's 1-800-330-1991. SelectQuote. We shop, you save. Full details on example policies at selectquote.com/commercials.
With the economy the way it is, you're probably staying put. So invest in your home, your number one asset, with beautiful custom replacement windows from Advanced Window Products. They're a local Utah company building beautiful vinyl framed and insulated double pane windows for 37 years right here in Salt Lake City. Advanced Window Products will save you money on your energy bill. Get security features to keep your family safe. And at Advanced Window Products, it's all custom. And the best part, they're local. They build the windows, they install the windows, and they guarantee them for life. So there's no middleman markup. You save on the highest quality windows in Utah. Plus, Rocky Mountain and Dominion offer rebates. For a limited time, they offer 60-month 0% financing. And right now, get $2,000 off 10 windows or more. They're working 8 weeks out. So make the call now. Advanced Window Products, 801-850-9100. That's 801-850-9100 or visit advancedwindowsusa.com.
At Shane Company, we believe everybody is made to shine. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. Shining is not for a chosen few. Like a rare gemstone, each one of us was created under just the right set of circumstances. Your moments, your milestones, your love story, all deserve to shine bright. You don't need an occasion or an invitation. You and your life are the event. At Shane Company, we handcraft our jewelry with the greatest care and hand select the most beautiful gemstones so you can shine. So put on a pair of earrings that make your eyes sparkle. Wear diamonds that light up the room. Try on sapphires in every color of the rainbow. Give an heirloom that collects new stories with each generation. We're all made to shine. Shane Company, fine jewelry since 1929.
Any Hour Services can make sure your AC keeps you cool this summer. Whether you need a tune-up, repair, or just a second opinion about replacing it, call Any Hour Services or visit anyhourservices.com.
At KSL News Radio, we have a 30-year legacy of honoring Utah teachers, but we can't do it without your help. Please tell us about an important teacher in your life on the KSL Teacher Tribute Wall, presented by Cypress Credit Union. Each month, one lucky teacher wins a $500 gift card from Cypress Credit Union, a $250 gift card to Harmon's, plus season tickets to Hale Center Theater. Say thanks to your teacher today at kslnewsradio.com/teacher from Cypress Credit Union and KSL News Radio.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, northern Utah has seen roads buckle in this summer's extreme heat, but it's not happening in southern Utah. That's partly because most southern Utah highways are paved with asphalt instead of concrete. Second, a lawsuit is challenging the candidacy of one of the Republicans in the Utah 2nd District primary. And third, Phoenix has had temperatures over 110 degrees for 20 days in a row, and 18 people have died in the heat. Right now, 90 degrees, and it's mostly sunny in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It is great to be with you today, as always. I am Boyd Matheson, and as we round out the program today, it was really interesting. Earlier in the day today, Chris Sununu, governor of New Hampshire, popular governor. I think he's the most popular governor in the country, at least according to a number of surveys. He's well known. He's accomplished real results, and he's won election and re-election. So he's been in for 8 years. In New Hampshire, of course, you get 2-year terms as a governor. I think that's a tricky thing. So he won and then was re-elected 3 more times. And he said today, declared today, that he will not run for re-election, even though he would be the overwhelming favorite to win another 2-year term there as governor of New Hampshire. And even earlier before that, he said that he will not run for president on the GOP side of the aisle. I don't think he's going to run under the no labels label either. But it's an interesting thing. In his announcement today that he would not be running, he said something that I think is important and that I think we don't talk about nearly enough. He said public service should never be a career, and the time's right for another to lead the state. That's a good thing. And you can look at all the positioning, and it doesn't matter whether you love him or hate him. I think that's kind of the model. I think that's what the founders of the country had in mind, that you come in, you go for a season, it's public service, you go like crazy, you make a difference, you get some real results, you leave a legacy, and you go home. I used to regularly tell staff in the Senate that that's the deal. Come in here, work like crazy, make a difference, leave a legacy, and go home and make a difference in your own community. Pursue a career, do family, do community, do all of those things. And, of course, that really goes back all the way to, I think, one of the most important moments in history, especially American history, and that is when, after the Revolutionary War, General George Washington, who really became the first conquering general in history, all of history, to not become the ultimate power after winning the war. But he didn't. He didn't. He said back in December of 1783, he actually made a statement. He said, having now finished the work assigned to me as general, I retire from the great theater of action, and bidding an affectionate farewell to this august body, under whose orders I have so long acted, I here offer my commission and take leave of all the employments of public life. And that was a stunning moment. Again, the conquering general saying, I'm not going to assume absolute power. Of course, there were many saying and telling him he should become the king. And he said, no. He said no. In fact, it's interesting to note that King George III, on hearing about Washington resigning his commission, said if Washington does that, he will be the greatest man in the world. And for once, I think King George III was not wrong. I think he was right. I think that is the right thing. And I think what Governor Sununu is doing is the right thing. Now, whether that leads him to other political things down the road, that's another story. And that's fine. But the thing that I worry about is we end up having good people across the political spectrum who are getting out of the game because of the game. Because the game has become so nasty, so partisan, so divisive, so personal, that we're losing a lot of good women and a lot of good men in public service. And what that leads to is the worst thing for all of us. It leads to a kakistocracy. A kakistocracy is when the people least qualified, the worst people, govern. And if the only people left who are running for public office are the performative politicians who love to hear themselves or see themselves on social media, who love to say things that are shocking or crazy or things that are great for fundraising or that get them on national cable news, we will end up with a kakistocracy. And that's bad for you, that's bad for me, that's bad for our children and grandchildren and for society as a whole. And so I think what that requires is we need more choices, not less choices. We shouldn't just accept the false choice that the only choices are Republicans or Democrats. I actually want to go real quickly to something that John Huntsman Jr. said back at the No Labels event back in New Hampshire. And he talked about this idea of those who are up in arms that we can really only choose between a Democrat or a Republican. Those are the only choices. He said, I've heard that before. Guess where he heard it?
This is the latest talking point. It's like the horse race. Forget about the issues, forget about the importance of expanding and enhancing our democracy. So you live in a place like China or Russia, and I've lived in both, running both U.S. embassies. They don't allow any choice. There's no participation. They're complete, pure authoritarian systems. So when I start hearing people here say, oh, well, that's not a good thing. You shouldn't do things to expand and enhance our participation in the system. It might result in A, B, or C winning or losing. I say, I've heard that before, but not in this country. Here, we do it differently.
And we have to do it differently. And so as we continue to watch what came out of New Hampshire this week, the No Labels town hall that took place there, their new policy statement around common sense democracy, and constitutional republic. We look at John Sununu saying he's not going to run, that public service should not be a career. Regardless of where you think those things lead, it should lead all of us to thinking differently, to saying, no, it's not just either or. And it's not just